Hello and welcome to Trevecca. My name is Jeff Lilienthal and I will be your facilitator for Module 1. And I want to add my welcome to the many welcomes I'm sure you've already had tonight. First thing I want to mention is this video is going to be far from perfect. First of all, I'm not very photogenic, as you can tell. My bald head, I hope you don't get a glare in your eyes from that. Far from perfect. This is not a professionally done video, but I'll do my best. Do have my little cheat sheet over here, my little outline, so hopefully we can get through that and hopefully everything will make sense to you. There are basically three things I want to do tonight. The first one is to give you the best ways to reach me, because I know you're going to have questions and issues that are going to come along, so I'll do that. And then I want to sort of do a broad overview of personal leadership development. You know, what is it involve, that sort of thing. And finally, conclude with your first week's assignments. Go over those, especially your autobiographical essays, so that hopefully you're clear on what to do with that. But again, you'll have my contact information should you need to reach me during the week. Okay, let's get started. First of all, the handouts. You should have a syllabus. You should have been given a syllabus for tonight's class. You should also have been given what we call the grading rubrics for the entire module. That's going to include 4 or 5, I think about 5 different rubrics for the different papers and projects that you'll have due. So you know how that's scored. You'll know exactly what the criteria is on grading. And you should also have what we call the end of course collaborative learning team member evaluation. Looks like that. I hope you can see that. And then something called a learner reflection paper. I don't know if it's going to show up on camera, but it looks like this. And that learner reflection paper is basically not so much a paper, but just a little 7-point questionnaire that helps us as a department and myself as a faculty member to get a pulse of how you're doing in class, issues that you have, things that helped you, things that might have been confusing during the class period, that sort of thing. So you'll fill one of those out for each session that we have together, and that'll be very helpful for both of us. All right, let me just very briefly introduce myself to you. Again, my name is Jeff Lilienthal. I come by that name because my dad was born in Austria. I have a background in education, business management, and counseling, primarily counseling. I have a master's degree in counseling, was a professional counselor for many, many years, and inpatient hospitalization settings, outpatient, community mental health centers, that sort of thing. I have 4 wonderful children. My wife also works at Trevecca, and we can get to know each other a little better next week, but I just want to give you a brief overview of my background. As far as the best way to reach me, you'll find that right on the front page of your syllabus. If you're going to reach me by phone, which you're welcome to do, my cell phone number is 615-415-3118. If you'd like to reach me by email, I really prefer you use this email address, jeff.lilienthal, that's Lilienthal, @comcast.net. So those are the 2 best ways to reach me. Now let's go into a brief overview of personal leadership development. The class is basically going to deal with such issues as, what does it mean to be a leader, especially from a Christian perspective? You know, we hear a lot about leadership, but what does it mean from a Christian perspective to be a leader? Is leadership something that you're born with? In other words, are some people just naturally born leaders, just natural born leaders? Or can anyone learn leadership skills and learn to be a leader? How does personality style or personality types fit into this leadership equation? You may or may not know in week number 2 you're going to take an assessment called the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator. In just a minute I'm going to show you the materials that you should have been given tonight. But among those is a booklet related to the MBTI. But we're going to look real carefully at how do leadership personality styles fit into this leadership equation. And finally, we'll look at the concept of servant leadership and how to discover and cultivate a personal sense of calling and vocation as a servant leader. Now I have to turn the page of my outline here. Okay, let's look at the materials, the textbooks, and so on you should have been given tonight. The first one I want to mention is a book called Work Types. Here it is right here. And that's by Kummerow, Barger, and Kirby. Should have that book. The second one is something called a writer's reference. Alright, and that will be real helpful in terms of your writing style and citing sources, both in the body of your papers and on your list of references or your works cited page. We'll look at that in just a minute. The third resource that you should have is a book called Christian Reflections on the Leadership Challenge by Kouzes and Posner. Looks like this. Alright, and finally you should have a booklet that's called Introduction to Type in Organizations, and it looks like this. Alright, now if you were given the score sheet for the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, which looks like this, self-scorable protocol, please give it back to the facilitator tonight, because that's supposed to come to me, and I'm going to hand those out in week 2, because you're going to actually take that assessment in week 2, but I don't want you to take it early. So if you have that by accident, please give it back to the facilitator. Now I'd like to look at our first assignments together. The first one that I want to mention is a 2 to 3 page autobiographical essay. And if you will turn to page number 7, go over this in just a bit more detail. It's worth 5 points, and you're going to do this in what's called a expressive writing style. And there's actually 3 purposes for this paper. Number 1, to reintroduce you to the writing experience. For many of you, it may have been years since you've been in school, so you're going back to finish up your degree, so I'm going to reintroduce you to the writing experience. Secondly, to introduce you to me, to your facilitator. I want to get you to know you better, and this is going to allow me to do that by reading your paper. And finally, to provide a writing assessment, to kind of get an idea of where you are in your writing abilities. But I do want to calm you down and reassure you it is a step-by-step process. Some of you have great writing skills, some of you it's been so long. Don't worry about it. Wherever you are, you start there and then just kind of build from there. Expressive writing is very personal, so you're going to do this basically from a first-person voice, kind of like you would if you were writing in a diary or something, or journal, that sort of thing. Again, it is a 2 to 3 word processed paper. You're going to reflect on the story of your life. A good way to start this is to develop a timeline of your life, and a good way to do that is to do it in outline form. So before you write the paper, you just do sort of a skeletal sort of outline with, Roman numeral 1, Roman numeral 2, with maybe ABCs under the Roman numerals. But you're going to begin with a timeline of your life. Beginning with the date of your birth, you're going to build your story year by year. You might include such things as where did you live, where did you go to school, where did you work, who did you marry, when were your children born, what were you what were you doing during significant times in our country's history, those sorts of things. However, the most important thing, it says right here on page 7, on the timeline should be the highs and lows in your life. As you remember the positive times, the big moments, the feel-good happenings, you're going to position them above the timeline. Likewise, include the negative times, the bad moments, the down times. So you can either have a horizontal timeline or you can do this in outline form. Either way that works best for you. But I do want to encourage you to begin with either a timeline or an outline form before you write the paper, so it's well organized. With a year-by-year outline, you can add your thoughts as they occur to you. So you've got your skeleton ideas, the big moments of your life, and you're going to fill in the spaces. Now, obviously, in a paper this size, a 2 to 3 page paper, you're going to have to just hit the big things, the highlights, because you can't get too much detail in a paper of 2 to 3 pages. But if you look at the scoring rubric, it's going to say things like introduction, thesis statement, sequencing of events, how well did you do that, transitions between main ideas, how well did you transition from one idea to another. Your grammar and spelling are obviously important. Did you follow instructions? And did you have a good conclusion? Now, I want to zero in on one thing, and that's the thesis. Some people are, well, what is a thesis? Well, I'm going to give you a real simple definition tonight. A thesis is a position or proposition submitted and supported by an argument. So you're going to put forth a particular big theme, and you're going to support that with things like evidence, examples, in the case of your autobiographical sketch, logic, reason, but most of all by examples. Let me give you a specific example. Here's an autobiographical thesis, an example of what that might sound like. Yours is obviously going to sound different because you're not this person, but here's one that I actually got. My life today would be so different, even the fact that I'm still alive, if not for the wise and loving influence of my wonderful parents, Bob and Karen Jones. Now, I changed this person's name to protect their identity, but that was one I actually got. Listen again. My life today would be so different, even the fact that I'm still alive, if not for the wise and loving influence of my wonderful parents, Bob and Karen Jones. Now, this person went on to use that idea as sort of the glue. Okay, your autobiographical thesis is your central unifying theme. It's the glue that kind of holds the story together. So in this case, this student talked about Bob and Karen Jones. And you want to consider who or what has had the greatest influence on your life up to this point. That's something you definitely want to factor in. Here's another thing to consider. In most cases, the thesis usually comes at the end of the first paragraph. Now, why do I say that? Generally, as you see here on the rubric, your introduction should be inviting. It's kind of like a funnel. You open your paper with this some attention-getting ideas, and then you kind of draw your reader in to your thesis. In this case, my life today would be so different. Even the fact I'm alive, if it were not for the loving influence of my wonderful parents, Bob and Karen Jones. This student really spoke about her story. The fact that her parents had such a great influence on her. They loved her through the hard times, the difficult times, the rebellious times. That was the glue that kind of held her autobiographical sketch together. Even though she got married and had children, and she went into military service, and all these things happened, the glue that held her paper together was that idea, that her parents were really sort of the rock that she could lean on and go back to and count on their love and support all through that. So in your case, you want to think again of your thesis as your central unifying theme, the glue that holds your story together. Okay? And the best way to support that is with specific examples. She went on to show that the first time that she experimented with drugs, how her parents were there for her, how they didn't condone what she did, but how they still loved her through that. And then on through the other highs and lows of her life, how their love for her was a stabilizing force. In your case, whatever the central unifying theme is doesn't necessarily have to be positive. It could even be a negative thing, but it's sort of a central theme that is just sort of spoken into your story all the way along. So again, a thesis is a proposition submitted and supported by an argument, evidence, examples, and probably in the case of an autobiographical sketch, it's going to be specific examples that's going to support that. I hope that helps. Okay, let's go on and look at some of your other assignments. I'm going to have to turn back to page 12 here, and if you will with me, page 12 in the syllabus. You're going to read chapters 1 and 2 in the Leadership Challenge book, straightforward, and the foreword before chapters 1 and 2. And number 3, be prepared to share with your classmates. Now, this is not a written assignment. Be prepared to share 3 things. A time in your life when you were at your personal best as a leader. And you might think, well, why was I at my personal best? And then a leader you admire, and why? Okay. And then after reading chapters 1 and 2 in the Leadership Challenge, you're going to analyze what we call each of the 5 practices of exemplary leadership, and decide which one of these is or was most demonstrated by the leader that you admire most. Because the leader that you admire may be deceased, and that's why we use maybe was instead of the word is. And then number 4, write a list of 5 to 10 behaviors that enable you to learn and to study successfully. be prepared to share this list with your fellow learners, because we're going to do a group activity and that's going to factor in. What are 5 or 10 things that you've picked up on that help you learn well or study well? Okay. Now I want to mention a couple of other things real quick. The first one is I'd like you to also, in the writer's reference book, I'm going to grab it right here, this one, I'd like for you to read through pages 443 through 458. 443 through 458. I'm not asking you to memorize those pages or anything, but it's just basically an introduction to what we call APA style. APA just simply means the American Psychological Association. This is the style of writing and documenting sources that's going to be used through your 13 months with Trevecca all the way through to the end. So it's good to get into the habit of understanding a little bit about APA style right from the get-go. Specifically, zero in on page 449, which talks about in-text citation and listing references at the end of the paper. Basically, all that means is how do you account for sources that you're using right in the body of your paper, as well as on your works cited or reference page at the end. That's what it's dealing with. And finally, I want you to also read through, I think it's page 5 through 9, if I can find it here, in this booklet right here, An Introduction to Type and Organizations, just to get a sense of what the MBTI is about and that sort of thing. Now again, you should have, in addition to your syllabus and the textbooks and books that we mentioned, you should have the Collaborative Learning Team Member Evaluation. You're not going to fill that out yet. That's this. Okay, and the Learner Reflection Paper, which I said again is just a 7-point kind of an outline with some questions on it that you're going to fill out at the end of each class period. And then, of course, the scoring rubrics. You should have been given those as well. Okay. A couple other mentions, and then I'll let you go. Food. Please bring something to eat with you to our first class period. Don't want anyone fainting on us or anything like that. About an hour, hour and a half into class, you're going to be given a break. We do want you to have sustenance. We don't want anyone to get weak during class. It's a 4-hour period, as you know. I also want you to begin thinking about some ways that the class can share or rotate responsibilities for bringing food, and we'll talk more about that next week. So I just want to wrap up real quick what we talked about. The best ways to reach me: number 1, by phone, 615-415-3118. It's right on the front of your syllabus. Or by email, jeff.lilienthal@comcast.net. Well, I'm looking forward to meeting each of you next week. I'm looking forward to our time together. We're going to have fun. Hopefully we're going to learn a lot from one another. I learn from students all the time, so we will learn from one another. So God bless. Looking forward to see you next week at 6 p.m. Have a great week. Bye-bye.